Hi, everyone. Welcome to Yin Radio TV. I'm your host, Hillary Raimo. Joining me tonight is a special guest. Mary Joyce is here. Since 2008, Mary Joyce has been editor of the Sky Ships Over Cashiers website, which deals with UFOs and other cutting-edge topics. Her career also includes working for a Fortune 100 company, Texas Instruments, coordinating art and printing for Talking Children's books. In that capacity, she worked directly with the creative teams at Marvel Comics, Golden Books, Mr. Rogers, Bill Cosby's picture pages. Can't wait to ask her a question about him. And Steven Spielberg's E.T. book staff. Early in her career, she taught an experimental non-graded inner-city school and later held promotional positions with the world's largest private printing company, an air pollution control agency, political campaigns, and a community college. I'm excited to talk to you tonight, Mary. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Glad to be on your show. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you have 3 books. Well, 2 books and an article, if I understand correctly. Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left Behind for Us to Find.
That's also
Underground Military. Also a book, yes. Underground military bases hidden in North Carolina mountains. We'll be talking about that tonight. And Cherokee Little People Were Real. So I'm excited to jump in and start right away. So I think I'd like to pick the topic of these underground bases in North Carolina to begin with. How did you come into this work and how did you find your way to this material?
I've been editing a website called skyshipsovercashiers.com since 2008, and actually the initial contacts have come from people who have followed the website, and I always check these people out individually and meet with them in person to make sure they are legit, but I've had a number of very credible whistleblowers come forward saying the world needs to know what's happening, and the vast majority of these eyewitnesses have either been military, former military, law enforcement, people that are very, very credible. And so I've learned about 5 different underground bases here in the mountains of western North Carolina. Ironically, all of them are under major tourist attractions. There's one under the Smoky Mountains National Park, one under Mount Mitchell, which is the tallest mountain east of the Mississippi, one near Devil's Courthouse on the Blue Ridge Parkway, one in Linville Gorge, and one near Chimney Rock State Park under Sugarloaf Mountain. Some of your viewers may be familiar with some of those, at least the Smoky Mountain National Park.
Yeah, well, that's pretty amazing. I've been there myself, so to know that there's these things going on underneath these places, it's pretty fascinating to me. Doesn't surprise me. I've been in radio for 10 years, a little over a decade, and I've talked to a lot of people in the UFO industry and the genre, and different perspectives, different opinions, different research, and it just seems like the underground tunnel theme is really just something that's always there, no matter what you believe about the ET or the UFO stuff. It's always this ongoing thing. Do you believe that we have them littered all over the United States, that this isn't just something that might be in North Carolina, but we have them pretty much everywhere? So there's some known places, but actually, what's your opinion on the military?
There's quite a few places in the West that many, many people are aware of. You know, the most notorious one would be Dulce, New Mexico. But the reason I wrote the book was because I hadn't heard of anything of those here in the mountains of the Appalachians, and that's why I decided to write the book. If somebody else had already covered the topic, I wouldn't have gotten into it, but it's not been covered. So
what was your fascination with the topic? How did you get into the UFO world? What was your initial experience that brought you into it?
Going way back, I used to live in Florida and used to see a lot of UFOs. In fact, I lectured on it all over the state at that time. But once I moved here, we got to know this woman, and she had an 8-year-old daughter, and the 8-year-old got a wonderful picture of a UFO smack in the middle of the sun. It was a traditional saucer-shaped UFO. She didn't even know it was there until they went and looked at the picture. And her mother and her grandmother and other people had been seeing so many UFOs in Cashiers, North Carolina, which is one of these mountaintop communities where people vacation in the hot summer months, and then the town goes kind of quiet in the winter. But that's initially what started the website, because we couldn't believe how many UFOs we were seeing here in the mountains.
What kind of UFOs were you seeing, Mary? What did they look like?
We've seen everything. We've seen every shape, color. About almost exactly a year ago, we saw a kind that I have never seen anywhere on the internet. And we have photos of them. If people look in the section on the website of Skyship Photos for 2015, they will find them. And they look like giant asteroids. They look like rocks. And talk about camouflage, but they do not move through the sky. They move slowly. And then even though they're not illuminated, the people were still able to get photos of them. Those were the most unusual. The rest of them you probably have heard about them, the saucer shape and the little scout ships, and the ones that have different decks, and the ones that are triangular shape. We've had everything here.
So if I understand you correctly, have you seen them yourself? Have you been out there and seen those actual shapes yourself?
I've seen UFOs. Actually, I've seen more myself when I lived in Florida, because I lived on the beach. We had a clear view. Where I live now, there's a mountain straight up behind me. I'm under the trees, so in order to see the sky, I have to leave the premises, and you have to make a real effort to go out and see if you can see them. So people who live in more open areas are the ones that are usually getting the pictures. Besides, I was a journalist for many years, and so I don't want to be the story. I'd much rather be telling other people's stories and getting other people's photos to put out there. It's not about me.
Yeah. Well, which part of Florida, if you don't mind me asking, was it the Gulf side or the Atlantic side?
No, the Atlantic side. And I lived on the beach between Patrick Air Force Base, and I actually could see the launches go off from where I lived, and at Kennedy Space Center. And sometimes you would see UFOs appear when those launches would happen, which I thought was very interesting.
That is interesting. I have a friend who lives near Sarasota on the Gulf side, and she's had some experiences with seeing craft and different types of phenomena in the sky. So she was actually really curious about the show tonight, because she was familiar with your work, and I know she's watching, so I know she's going, yes, that's me.
Yeah, her initials are GS, and she contacted me after she figured out there was a connection between me and your show coming up, and she sent me some of the photos that she's taken, and she was responding to something we did quite a few years ago called, we called them the Blue Moon, and you can go out and you can still do this. In the middle of the day, you can aim your camera right at the sun, and you will see what I call a blue moon that will show up around the sun. And there's been pictures of these taken all over the country, perhaps all over the world. Many people want to say that it's just an optical effect from the camera, but we showed one of the photos to a man who was involved with the Hubble Space Telescope, and he said it was not an optical effect. And the photo that we showed him showed what we call a blue moon, or an orb around the sun, and then there were orbs around it. And we've only been able to capture that a few times, but people can actually go out in the middle of the day and often capture that just by aiming the camera at the sun. It's kind of fun to try. And if you zoom in, then you can see it more clearly.
So you have pictures available for people to see. They can go to your website either while they're listening, correct? Where would they find? Do you have these posted someplace for people to see them?
All right. The Blue Moon pictures, I think they'd have to go into the archives of Skyship Photos. And I'm pretty sure it was 2009 where we began to get those pictures. And you can just scroll through that section. Everything in that website has photos with it, and those will catch your eye. We tried to make the website like a very visual magazine. We don't do anything without some kind of graphic or photo or visual to go with the stories.
Yeah, well, it makes it easier for people, I think, to say, oh, I've either seen something like that, maybe that was a UFO, or it gives them some insight to see maybe if they see something coming. It might be similar.
If any of your listeners or watchers happen to get a good shot, send it to us on the website, again, which is Skyships Over Cachers. Up on the homepage on the upper left, there is the how to report a sighting, and it gives you all the contact information.
So you were in Florida and you moved up to North Carolina. Did you know about the phenomena going on in North Carolina before you moved up there?
I just knew that I like mountains. No, all of this has been a surprise, and it's been one of the most interesting places that I've ever lived because of the little people stories, the Bigfoot stories, the UFO stories, and the underground bases stories. Those 4 topics alone can keep you quite entertained with mysteries.
No shortage there.
Not at all.
So tell me about the first time when you went out on in the field to search for these places or to look for evidence. What was that like for you?
Are you talking about the underground bases?
Yeah, yeah, when you were looking. Well, whatever. Yeah, both actually.
Okay, whatever. I'll just jump around. The most recent thing where I got involved myself was we are doing an ongoing research project with Bigfoot, and we are taking the Jane Goodall approach to Bigfoot. And if people aren't familiar with her, she is like the chimpanzee expert in the world. And she has been very gentle and gets involved with the chimpanzees in a very natural way. So we have set up a gifting site where we leave food for the Bigfoot, and they like music. One of the gals plays a wooden flute, and that lets them know that we're there. And so part of that investigation I have done firsthand. One of the times one of the mountain men was taking me to where a cave is where the Bigfoot will, shelter. And we were walking way into the woods, half mile to a mile, and it was very quiet. And we heard this whistle or a bird sound that wasn't quite like a bird. And then it went silent. And then further down the road in the area where these caves were, we heard it again. And it was like one Bigfoot was signaling the other one that these 2 humans were headed their way. So that is... and I've seen the footprints myself. We had one house that really was quite traumatized initially by the Bigfoot. They are in a very sheltered valley in the high mountains here, and they had a pond, and it needed to be repaired, and somebody was out there with a jackhammer, and they went right through into something that was hollow. In hindsight, they realized that they drilled into the cave and all the water was going into where the Bigfoot lived. Well, the Bigfoot got really upset, and they started invading their houses and invading their cars. It sounded pretty awful, and if people want to see all the pictures from that, it would be under the Bigfoot section on the website. And they got into the house, and the people moved out, and the Bigfoot actually were taking felt tip pins and scribbling on the wall, and then eventually you could see that they were trying to write, and their footprints were all over the place. Their handprints were all around the doors and all around their cars. Eventually it calmed down, and we went out there and we tried to communicate with the Bigfoot and let them know that we didn't intend to disturb them. And they left a gift at the front door, and it was like a little basket made out of almost like burlap material. And in this little basket there were 3 very old coins and something else that was shiny, and they just left it in front of the door, and they didn't really cause a lot of trouble after that. It's like peace came, and we haven't had that kind of destructive behavior since then. But if somebody drilled a hole in the top of my house and flooded it, I would be very annoyed also.
Mad, angry, yeah. What a great story, wow. So do you still have this basket and the coins?
The woman may have it.
Look at the contents inside the basket?
The woman has it. I don't have it. It's her house, and so it's obviously her basket.
Wow, what a great story. Well, I've heard stories about the Bigfoot being a very sentient being and having an awareness and a consciousness, and so if you do communicate, there is some kind of reciprocal interaction there. So you obviously had a good feeling about it.
Yes, I do. Let me give you one more story with the gifting. Food was being left almost every day at this one spot for them, and we did a test to see what they liked and all of that, and we gave them different gifts, and sometimes they would take them and sometimes they didn't. The only gift that they really took was a little butterfly that I did a wood burning on a piece of wood. It was about this big. And that was taken. Well, during the Christmas holidays, we didn't get to the gifting site for about 10 days. And when we returned, they had returned the butterfly. We almost felt like I don't know, like they felt responsible for us not showing up. I don't know. But they returned it about 6 weeks after they'd taken it.
Wow.
So,
oh, that's amazing. So now, how does... when I first started to look through your work, I was really intrigued with the little people, the Cherokee little people. So when you're talking about Bigfoot, it gives me hope to believe in the little people. And I can't wait to get to that part of the show. But, if we have Bigfoot and then we have the little people, doesn't that kind of tell us that we're dealing with life forms on this planet that aren't necessarily from another planet, but are still here, that we still don't know and we don't understand yet, and we haven't really officially learned how to properly interact with?
We have not figured it all out, that's for sure. Where I live is near the Cherokee Indian Reservation, and while most of the little people, I think, have died off, the Cherokees, the elders, tell me that in the remote parts of the reservation that there are still reports of little people. So if Bigfoot can, avoid all of us, I'm sure little people can do it much more easily.
Well, speaking of little people, let's give viewers and listeners a little bit of insight into what we're talking about, and it might be a good time to go into that work next anyway. Okay. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by what are the Cherokee little people? What's the myth behind them? Where do we start with that?
Okay, I moved to North Carolina in 1998 and had never heard of Cherokee little people. And when I first did, I kind of dismissed it as just like old Indian legends. And then one day a man came into where I was working at the time, and he was an elderly man who was very well respected in the community. And he said, no, they're real. And he told me that when he was a young man, right after World War II, that he was involved in constructing new buildings at Western Carolina University, which is about 20 minutes away from where I live. And when they would cut into virgin land, they would find these little tunnels, and they were always in real dense, damp, red clay. The tunnels were typically 2 feet wide and about 3.5 feet tall, and it was arched at the top. And if you know anything about engineering, that makes the tunnel stronger. Well, they cut in every place they built. They seemed to run into these. And they even found a little skeleton. One of the science teachers kept this skull on his desk, sort of like a decorative paperweight. And one day a high school teacher came by, and she picked it up and looked at it, and she said, this isn't a child's skull, which is what he thought it was. It has all its wisdom teeth. And there were 2 Indian mounds on the campus. The old-timers said they weren't really Indian mounds because all these tunnels would come to this pile of dirt, and they remember when there was an open tunnel going straight down into this Indian mound, and the farmer at the time would take big, thick logs, 6 to 10 inches in diameter, and put them down in this hole so the cows wouldn't fall into the hole. And the old-timers said this was just a pile of dirt from digging out these tunnels, because these tunnels would all come to this mound. And it makes a lot of sense. Makes a whole lot of sense. But they found skeletons. Well,
yeah, I mean, there's myths and stories in indigenous Native American lore in all different tribes that talk about little people. Most of us just dismiss that as, symbolic or archetypal, but they really have these stories and these drawings of these little people, and they would have prayers for them and make offerings to them, just like your Bigfoot offering. Right. It's like once you made the offering to Bigfoot, Bigfoot came back and said, we're friends.
Right.
And I think that's a big statement. And philosophically, when you look at that, what that means, it means that we can communicate with other species in a variety of different ways. It can be dramatic and chaotic, or it can be peaceful and harmonious. And so when we move to the UFO topic, it's not so far-fetched to bridge the two, to say, well, if we can show that we can have compassionate, humane interactions with other species on our planet, then we can, in fact, have humane and compassionate interactions with ETs. I know I'm jumping back to this for a second, but it kind of flows with the conversation, and it naturally goes into the question, where does your opinion stand? There's a lot of people who say ETs are not good. They are good. There's some good, some bad. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that they're just like humans. You and I like to think of ourselves as being really nice people, but then we have all the rascals who are running Mideastern countries and running nasty political campaigns and all that, and you begin to wonder, but we're all the same species. I mean, Gaddafi was, a human just like you and I are, but he was a very terrible man. I think in the ET world we have the good and bad also, and I think you're a psychic, and I think everybody has some ability that way. We have to pay attention to our intuitive feelings, and you'll sense whether ETs are good or bad, and we have to pay attention to those feelings because they're not all good.
No, I agree. And some are master rascals and some are just rascals. So we kind of have to discern between the two. It makes a good point, but it also brings up an interesting debate within the UFO industry, because there has been some really powerful opinions in how we need to be fearful of them, and we need to build up defenses and, invest all of our money into the military industrial complex and go into all these different directions. Some say they're for secret top UFO programs. Others say they're for, Earth to space and space to Earth based weapons. Who knows, really, because we're not really up there to see it unless we are. But I think it's kind of like, instead of debating about it, let's just focus our energies on going out and working the reality of it, and looking for the evidence and going into those areas where the evidence shows up and doing some exploring and looking. And then when we actually sit down across the table from an actual ET who's willing to communicate and it's all out on the table publicly, then we have an opportunity to make an opinion. I don't know. I guess it's more of a rant than a question, Mary. It's more like, I've heard it all. I've been exposed to
I think I've heard it all too, and I think we need to focus on the good and try to make that stronger and tune into it. I think that's our own protection too. If there's evil out there, if we're tuning into what is good, then we can perhaps avoid that which isn't so good.
Now, where do you see the industry as a whole evolving to? I mean, just the UFO, I call it industry because it makes a lot of money. There is an investment in it. You can go out and buy a trillion books on the subject. You can go pay tons of money to go listen to people speak on it. And there's just been a lot of things that have come out, testimony that you really can't, once you get into, you really can't deny. But then what happens, I see a lot of times, people get into the information and they get so confused and so lost or so frustrated with the information that they either say, oh boy, I can't touch this, somebody's going to hack into my computer and erase all my stuff, or they kind of dilly-dally in it and dabble here and there, and then because they've watched 10,000 episodes of Ancient Aliens, they're all experts now and everything is Ancient Alien. It's kind of becoming like a crazy phenomena type trendy thing to do. So do you feel as a researcher, especially as a woman researcher, that your work is taken seriously in the context that this is real work, these are real experiences happening, and please, how do you balance the foo-foo stuff and the woo-woo stuff with the realities and the serious researching? Do you have a problem with it, or do you see it as a problem somewhere else?
I'm going to bring back my background again, because having been a newspaper feature editor and another of other things with journalism, I'm taught to really investigate and to try to remain detached and to really find, real proof of things. And so even though I am very open to the psychic and the spiritual, and that is very much a part of what should be a part of all of our lives, when you're presenting stuff, there are too many people who are channeling, and they're just, I don't know, I think there's too much of them coming through, because there's a lot of things that aren't truthful that are that's coming out there in channeled form. And you have to be real careful. You really, again, have to listen to that intuitive feeling you have when you listen to anything. That's your protection. You know, there's hardly any other way you can protect yourself anymore. So
now, do you do that
to learn from...
When somebody comes to you with a story, is that what you do? You discern through the whole interaction of, you know, feeling the person out, kind of listening to the story, or do you go into more of an intuitive place where you read the information and let your intuition speak to you through the information? How does it? How's the process? I'm curious as a process.
When I get something in an email, I can read it, and you kind of get a feel of where that person's coming from. That's one level. If I decide to do a story, especially if it's a serious one, if possible, I want to meet with the individuals. I want to see them face to face. I want to be able to read their body language and see, you know, how sincere, how truthful they are. And all of the people who are witnesses for the most recent book I did about the underground bases, I've had eye-to-eye contact with them and feel like they're credible. And I don't print everything that I get, because some things have too much of an open hole, and I'm not going to put that out there.
Yeah, so you use that as you... Now, would you suggest that people take that same kind of approach when they get into, like, the amateur armchair type researching, where they're, you know, on Google and they're looking through and watching shows like this and reading people's books and kind of saturated in information, to kind of just sit through it intuitively and let it speak to them?
Also, look for confirmation in more than one direction if you possibly can. There's too many. I get emails where people have picked up something they found on the internet, and then they just pass it along to everybody on their mailing list. And then when I go and check out some of this stuff, it is rubbish when you dig to the original source. And people don't do that. And people, if they want to be responsible, need to take an extra step. Go to the original source. Many of these things that are sent out are second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand information. If you can, get back to the source and check it out and see if that's real. I do that all the time. And many stories never get pushed out from our website because they don't prove to be valid.
Yeah, well, thank you for being in your integrity with that. And I think that's what makes one of your websites a valuable resource, is because you have that integrity to go and check. I once saw a news article go out through alternative media, and the source was completely, obviously not, it was just a bogus source, and it got regurgitated in just about every single alternative media outlet that could possibly happen, and then some, and it went completely viral, and everybody was talking about this, and so few people took the time to actually source check it, and it was obviously so bad that somebody had did it intentionally to say, see, look, I can put something so bad out there, and it'll spread like wildfire through the alternative media. I think we have a responsibility as alternative media people, whether we're hosting a radio show or we're on a radio show, is to just make sure the quality of information that comes through has been checked. And so I think that's just important.
You know, if we want to pound a point home, that is one. And at one time when I worked for newspapers, I worked for them when they were really big and thick and fat, before the internet and TV took over all the news. And I'm applying the same thing that we did for a major newspaper in the stories we do for the website, and really try to check them out. I would be embarrassed if I knowingly put out garbage.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. We appreciate it. Now, I want to ask about your background working with Steven Spielberg and his ET staff, and how that bridges over into your ET UFO research and advocacy. Was that kind of an inspiration to you to do it, or had you already started the UFO stuff before you went to work for him?
I was not into UFOs at all at that time. I mean, just passing interest. That was before I moved to, was in Florida and started seeing UFOs for myself. So that had nothing to do with it. I was simply involved with doing full-color talking children's books. And one of the ones we did was E.T. And I probably have seen the movie E.T. more than any other movie I've ever seen, because we keep checking for things. As much as I would like to say I worked with Steven Spielberg, I didn't. I worked with his book staff and his designers and you know, those people. But but it was fun, and worked for Marvel Comics and went to New York and worked with, you know, the cartoonist, and it was fun. It was, those kind of creative people are a delight to be with.
Yeah, I have to ask who your favorite superhero is. Did you have a favorite superhero?
Well, it has to be Superman. I mean, Spider-Man, because that's the one we did for Texas Instruments.
Wow. Yeah, I like to, I'm an artist. I do paint and do a variety of different artwork. And one of the things I love so much is the artist process of getting into that space and doing the creative work. And when I contemplate the subject of ETs and UFOs, I find that there's a similarity in the space, the creative space. The higher my frequency is, or the better I'm in that creative space, it seems like the contact experience or the channel experience, whatever you want to call it, is easier, and it just feels like it's of a lighter type feel. Have you had any channel experiences yourself going into?
Yeah, this book is no longer in print, but back in the late 80s, I did a book called Psychics Don't Scare Me Anymore. At the time, I was still working for corporations, and also when I was working for Texas Instruments, and I was traveling around the country. So I actually would try to find psychics. I think I ended up getting psychics in 5 states in Canada, and I would interview them, and I would have psychic readings, and I don't know where I was going with that, but so
you would have.
And as far as it goes, it evolved. That was really my learning experience, because even though I don't like to use the word, I do get channeled information.
Yeah, so the process...
And I'm uncomfortable with that word.
You are, yeah. Why? Let's talk about that.
Because it's a true word, because if you get totally relaxed and you lift up your energy to a higher level, then the spirit realm, which is operating at a higher level all the time, can more quickly communicate with you. So when we lift up our energy and they lower theirs, then there can be communication. So channeling, where information flows through you, is really the right term. It's just, it's been misused so much that I wish there was a new term we could use to give it a fresh start.
Yeah, but maybe we'll make up a new word during our show today, and it'll be a goal we can kind of put out there. Hey, we want a new word for the experience of channeling. Yeah, and if anybody's listening and you guys have the word, please send it to my chat box or email me after the show. I'd love to hear it. What a great idea. Well, I've been contemplating an idea, and I'd like to share it with you, if that's okay.
Okay, go for it.
I'm thinking about, you know, our world as a whole, and how we have been talking about all of this talk of the divine feminine energies, the cosmic energies, all of these different mind expanding, heart expanding type experiences, that I think that we've kind of begun our own sort of 60s revolution. You know, we're going through a renaissance of consciousness, if you will. And don't you think that in some levels that implies that we need a new kind of psychology to be able to define and understand new human beings as we evolve? So I've been spending some time writing and thinking about this topic, and I said, I'm going to ask Mary tonight when we come on the show what she thought about that, because it seems like when you have a contact experience, you don't fit into the traditional psychological mold. You know, there's just, I have a background in psychology. I never practiced in it, but I've studied it. And so it just doesn't make any sense when you go into the traditional psychological labels that we have from way back when to some of the experiences that we have now with all of these different interactions with earth-based ETs, with cosmic-based ETs, even with each other. You know, going into new relationships and understanding each other in different ways, practicing meditation more, evolving our spirit and our minds and our relationships and everything. I think there needs to be a new kind of definition of psychological map work, or, you know, how do you feel about that? Meaning, some of these people that come to you and say, I've had these experiences, but I don't know what to do with it. But if you were to say to them, well, it's this, like a psychologist would say to an ailment to happening to somebody, and then they say, oh, okay, well, that fits, and it all goes together, and okay, it makes more sense. Has anybody come up with this yet? Is this something that somebody's working on, maybe, that you know about, Mary, where we're talking about defining these things more mainstream so that people can fit into a better round box so that we can understand the evolving mind? I don't know if that's a question so much as a pondering philosophical kind of remark.
When I talk to people about anything spiritual, I try to use the language that the person is the most comfortable with. So I don't think we need to go out and find a bunch of new terms to give to everybody. I think we need to, each one of us needs to work with the vocabulary that the person is comfortable with that's in front of us. Categorizing things too much, I think, gets in the way. And that's why many times the guy behind the bar at a saloon is much better at counseling somebody than somebody sitting in an office with a notepad and a pencil while somebody stretches out on a couch and you know, pours everything out. I think we need to be real, and being real is using the language that people are comfortable with.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have to be able to have a conversation and come from the heart and just be yourself and be authentic and say what comes to mind instead of thinking about what you're going to say before you say it type thing. It makes for an easier, more spontaneous type synchronistic interaction, which from what you've told me so far is what these creatures respond to. You know, they respond to the open outpouring of empathy and being able to understand and connect and relate emotionally to something that's alive. Maybe you're not necessarily, I don't know, I think that's the answer. I think we should replace the word channeler with, I don't know, rascal. Be a rascal.
I don't know, but, you know, somehow keep it simple so that anybody, you know, can understand it. Everything is simplistic. You know, many people, they pursue different paths up the spiritual mountain, and we all hear the term, there's many paths up the mountain. Well, once you get up there, you find out everything is so simplistic, and everybody had gone through all this stuff to get to the top of the mountain, and people do it in all sorts of rituals and all different kinds of ways, but it gets back to simplicity. And I think that's what we need at the spiritual level, and that's what we need in communicating with other human beings. That's what we need in communicating with those who aren't human but obviously have a soul. Simple.
Yeah. I think it's the soul-to-soul contact. It's the soul-to-soul interaction.
And when you're being real,
I see people...
When you're being real, there's a telepathic level of communication, too. Last night I watched just a little bit of Hillary Clinton in a town hall meeting in New Hampshire, and she was more relaxed and being more real. And I haven't listened to much TV today, but I heard two people talk about how she should have been acting this way forever, and she would have done so much better. She was being more real, more genuine, more open, and it works. People read it. People understand that, and we all need to get more real. And many people I don't know, there's still people that are, quote, New Agers, and we need to get away from all of that, you know? Just keep it simple.
I like that. Keep it simple. Be real. It's very easy. It's just the instructions for life. I mean, people are still learning how to do it with each other.
I know.
People are still learning how to do it with themselves. I mean,
it's not helping that so many people are walking around only communicating with their iPhone. People, I think, are going to lose the ability to read eye language and body language, and I think that's not good for humans. I'm not going to become out, but we can't spend all our time communicating that way.
It's going to become video language. I mean, honestly, it's like everybody can. I think I have two younger sons in their teenage years, and they I have conversations with them all the time about this, and I'm so thankful they can talk about this. But they say they see it in a lot of other people too, is this kind of inability to relate to a reality because their virtual reality is so real, but then their 3D, you know, knock on wood reality is kind of less engaging and not so exciting, and they get very addicted to it, and it's just as real as anything. And I like to say I'm one of the last in the generation that grew up with like a phone that plugged into the wall and actually had a cord attached to it. And remember beepers? Beepers were like the big thing for a few years. Everybody had a beeper. So they have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk to them about that. It's something they would see in a museum, but it's almost created a completely different social world. The kids now have to worry about being bullied online or having their whole personal life dragged out all over the place. We're really dealing with some questionable stuff in our digital age, and we're kind of moving in, hopefully, with a higher level of consciousness into this digital age. But anyway, I forget why I was going there, but it was just kind of one of those things that felt important to say, because in relating to other people, we have to be able to relate to ourselves, be authentic to ourselves, and that means expressing every facet of us, whether it's not just giving what you think somebody wants. Well, I'm just going to show you my perfect parts, and you'll accept my perfect parts, and then reject all my other imperfects. And until it's just like, just be who you are, and stop worrying about what's perfect or imperfect or what other people think. Show your emotions. I think we have to do a breakthrough session with humanity on some level to get them to really understand that emotional intelligence is okay. To be smart emotionally and be able to be so able to go into your emotions without feeling, like you're doing something wrong or there's something wrong with that. I hope that as we get smarter and we get more technologically advanced and we make more contact efforts with other species, that we've matured enough to be able to handle the contact. Because sometimes I see a world that just really would rather take out the next gun and just shoot it and hang it up on their wall as a trophy, versus let's sit down and have a conversation and see what we can engage and learn from each other. I know that sounds kind of hopeless in some aspect, but I mean, if you turn the news on or you listen to what people are talking about or how they're treating each other, it's not a very pretty picture. How do you see that evolving for us as a species? I mean, going into ourselves where we can relate enough to who we are to relate to another human, to relate to an ET or extraterrestrial or more intelligent creature.
The ETs, the Bigfoot, the little people all communicate telepathically. And that's, we're the ones that fail to do that. And the more we zero in on the computer, the less we cut off that telepathic ability, which I think every human being has. And we need to make it happen again. Get your boys to start doing telepathic tests with each other. See how they do. Make a game of it.
Yeah, I've actually done that. And it is, if you get somebody who's really open to doing it and they don't have any issues around it, it can be a lot of fun, and the results can be quite, wow, that was great, or, trippy or whatever. And I was just reading an article as well that science is starting to, and see, if a scientist says it, we all seem to take it as a much more legitimate thing. And scientists are now coming out with some articles, interestingly enough, about telepathy and how telepathic abilities are soon to become real. And I'm laughing at it because I'm like, we've been telepathic for a long time. There's been plenty of people who've talked about that, even going back in our history. But telepathy also requires it's a transparency. You can't hide anything. You can't present a personality, coming out your mouth and then inside being a completely other kind of person. There's a match that has to happen. Don't you think in telepathy, it's like, well, if you're thinking one thing and saying another thing to me, I can totally feel what you're thinking. So why are you telling me something different? How do you see that interrupting the process? How do you see that healing? What's your forecast on that for the human condition?
If mechanical things and technology don't inhibit us, then I think our intellect can sometimes get in the way. Now, mind you, I've already told you I use my intellect all the time trying to make sure that what's put on the website is accurate. At the same time, if you let me give you an analogy I got from a channeling a long time ago. And I was shown the image of a four-legged table. And one leg represents the physical body, one is the emotions, one is the intellect, and one is the spiritual. If there's a lot of three-legged tables walking around, and if you put too much weight on one side, the table will tip over. And people who are intellectual, they want that to be supreme, and they're afraid to let go and let the spiritual come in. From my experience, when you open up to the spiritual, it only enhances the intellect. And people need to know that, because it's the intellectuals who shut down the most important part of us. And again, the spiritual enhances everything else.
I like that. I think if anybody walks away with anything from tonight's show, it's that the spiritual enhances table. That the spiritual enhances the intelligence. I often think men and women have different intelligences. I think we literally are ingrained with a different wiring, and our intellect can be stirred in different ways. And so I think if you were to put a woman through a very scientific education, but then also taught her to keep her intuition open and keep her emotional energies clear and her emotional energies healthy and expressive, you might find some really beautiful answers inside some of these scientific complexities that you might not find if you keep that feminine element, if you will, because men have it too, out of it. So I think we stimulate our intelligence in different ways, and you're so right when you add that spiritual element to it, and then you do it with other people. You know, like if you meditate with other people, or you do prayer work with other people, it's been proven to enhance the experience. It's the same kind of thing. So it gives me hope, because not only are we dealing with I just did a show the other night on computer intelligence and talking about digital Bitcoin currency, stuff like that. And as I was talking about it, my guest was suggesting that consciousness within quantum computing, or making a conscious artificial intelligence, would be a very tricky thing to do, and it would be nothing more really than mimicking a human being who already has all that. So if that was the case, then I posed a question, and I said, after the show I posed the question because we ran out of time because it was such a fascinating conversation. And I said, well, then wouldn't human consciousness be able to hack into a quantum or conscious system through telepathy? So I don't know. And then he got all lit up. So I'm thinking, this is a great conversation, and we're talking about these really extraordinary concepts, and we're not necessarily owning the theory or creating some kind of ownership of an idea, but we're bouncing off each other. And in that spiritual connection of being open and having that kind of higher level conversation, we're actually able to access or open up different intellect within each other, and then we keep giving each other more and more information or more ideas. And I'm totally convinced, and I will talk about this till the day I leave this planet, that is one of the purposes that we're here to do, is to be able to own who we are, but then to be able to assist others as others assist us in increasing the intelligence that we have, whole being intelligence, not just the mind, not just the intellect, but the heart intelligence, the cellular intelligence. I think that, just you and I having this conversation has inspired me to think about some of these things and to express them on the show here. I don't know what you're thinking, Mary. Maybe you're thinking I better run for the hills off this crazy lady show.
No. Or
maybe
you're making sense. And you're able to reach a lot of people. And since you're on the same network, do you know or have you met Natalie Marie Hart? She's now 15.
No.
15. And she's had a radio show since she's 11. She handles any kind of topic an adult would handle on her, TV show. And there's a lot of kids out like that are coming in. I don't know what the best term for it is, but they're coming in as old souls who are very, very wise, and they know they have a mission and they're into it. And you would be great at connecting with young people like that. Find them because you can help them. And not all of them are blessed with parents that totally understand what they're about. And I think you would be really good at nurturing those kind of people.
Well, thanks. I have heard of her show, actually, and I think it's great that she does this work. I think we're seeing a whole new generation of evolution coming in. A lot of them are misdiagnosed.
Very encouraging. Very encouraging.
Yeah, it is, but I also see them often kind of interpreted as autistic or having attention deficiencies, and so medicated and those things. So we need to also encourage the parents to be more open to alternative ways of interacting with children, because oftentimes I actually contributed to a book by Dr. Karen Goody called Children Who See Ghosts a few years ago. And one of the things that we talked about in the book was how for the parents to deal with the kids who are seeing these phenomena or having these interactions with spirits, or sometimes people who have passed on and coming back home. The easiest mind to connect to is a child's, because it's so open and it's so vulnerable and trusting, whereas an adult might be a little more fearful and closed down, so therefore the phenomena can't take place, so they kind of naturally migrate to the children, which can be very scary depending on how it's dealt with. And I think that we're also watching an influx of the returning masters coming in through the children that are being born. Somebody said it perfect to me the other day. They said, how could we know what a child, we might have a pregnancy come in or a child come in who might have the cure for cancer or the cure for the planet's GMO situation or whatever's happening. We don't really know. So we have to nurture the minds of these children instead of trying to fit them into a box that doesn't work anymore, or an old systematic, unsustainable way of living and a way of seeing the world.
Right.
So I think ETs and the UFO phenomena is a natural progression, and these children and these young people who have access to so much technology might actually be better at it than us in getting the correct educational stuff together, the experiential stuff together, and moving it out into the world in ways that will eventually make people realize, hey, humans, you're not the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's other things out there that we need to learn from. And so we're going kind of everywhere, and this is a good conversation, by the way. Thank you. I'm enjoying it a lot, if you can't tell that.
I'm enjoying it. Thank you.
I guess what it comes down to too is how powerful is one consciousness. I mean, if you have an idea and it creates some kind of movement in your mind, how do you know? Because spooky action at a distance will tell you in quantum physics that your movement can affect things thousands of miles away.
Right.
We've got to kind of lead into my next topic I'd like to discuss with you, which is your other written project, the Jesus, the signs that were left behind.
Right.
Where do we go with this
it's going to be easy to get into that with you because of what you do. My other two books and the books I've done in the past have been more on the intellectual mental side. The Jesus book, I never intended to do it. I was awakened on the morning of October 5th, 2013, in the wee hours of the morning. It was still dark outside. And Jesus came through and said he wanted this book done. And he had very definite ideas. He wanted it to be concise, with lots of pictures. He wanted people to know more dimensions about him, because he's not completely fleshed out in what people read in the Bible. And he wanted it done in a month's time. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I just kind of stopped doing everything I was doing and focused on that. Thank goodness, because of my own curiosity, I'd done a lot of research that could be used for that. But it was done in a month to the day. And it has things in it that most people aren't going to know. It's kind of funny with the book. People who are in the box Christians think they know everything because they've studied the Bible, and so they're not inclined to read it. But then when the few that do, they go, oh my goodness, and because it doesn't blow down what they believe, it simply enhances it and gives a much broader picture. And he came as to be an example of what human beings can be, and he lived as a man. People don't know it, but at the time of Jesus, in order to be a rabbi, and he was called a rabbi, you had to be married. In order to teach children, and you had to be married. So all the information that's been coming out primarily since about 2012 about Jesus being married is not contradictory to the customs of the time of Jesus. And so there's a lot of information that validates his life in a very, very interesting way, from ancient Indian legends to there's actually, the book starts off with a letter that was written by Pontius Pilate and sent to Caesar, because Caesar is hearing about this, I'll use your word today, this rascal who's causing all sorts of turmoil. And there's, you know, he wanted to know about him. So Pilate had a letter and sent it to him and described Jesus. And he was very kind in his description of him. He did say he had much lighter features than the men that hung around with him, that he was, people were mesmerized by the way he spoke. But not only did he have the lighter hair, but he had the lighter eyes, and he was taller. Interestingly, there are legends throughout the Western Hemisphere, from Peru up to Canada, that have legends of a man that sounds just like Jesus that appeared to the different tribes. And again, they described him as having hair that had copper tints to it, and that his eyes were as changeable as the ocean. They were, you know, it would be blue or gray, or they seemed to change. So it appears that he appeared all over the world, not just to that Jewish center. He focused, I believe, on the Jewish center because it was a very educated group at that time period. So I think that was part of what was going on. And by the way, there's a wonderful book. I don't know if I can think of the title. It was written by Dolores Cannon. Are you familiar with her?
I am, yeah. Yes.
She was a hypnotherapist, so to speak, or she would hypnotize people and take them into past lives. And she has one book about the life of Jesus based on his life as in the Essene community. And it was the life of one of his teachers. Very interesting insights. And again, my gut feeling says it rings true. Sometimes I pick up a book, it sounds like it's going to be fascinating, and you go, oh, this can't be. But that rang true all the way through it. And anyhow, that gives you a gist.
Yeah, her work is great. And, you know, for anybody who's interested in learning more about her, I know she's deceased, she's passed on, but her work is still available, and she still has a wonderful course out there. I believe that you can still learn, so you can learn from her and her techniques.
The book about Jesus is her biggest seller, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, that doesn't surprise me. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that Jesus was an ET, that he was somebody that came from another planet to show humanity?
I do not. I think he's a man from our future. And I hate to use the word ET because you instantly think of little grays with big eyes, and I don't think he's one of those. But no. He certainly fits into like a Pleiadian. But I do think he is a man from our future. And there's been many people who've. Do you know Bob? Oh God, I'm going to think. Colonel Bob
Corso?
No. Never mind.
Never?
Anyhow, he had some near-death experiences, and there's a wonderful YouTube of him where he's talking about Jesus, and he's using all his sailor language, and at the same time saying Jesus is, you know, came across like his buddy. It was very, very interesting.
Well, I've always seen Jesus as kind of a necessary archetypal type male, divine male energy. If you take all the religious stuff and just kind of put it aside, and the dogma and the stuff that comes with it, and you just look at him as a man.
Look at him as a man and look at the words he actually said, and get rid of all the churchy stuff. You can't argue with it.
No. I think we need a role model of some sort of spiritual divine male energy. We also need a spiritual divine female energy. We need the two kind of energies to balance out. It was
intended to be balanced, and I think in the last 20 years, there's been so much emphasis on the divine female energy and on a Mary Magdalene, and I think it was because it was necessary to try to get this balance reestablished. I don't think women are supposed to rule the world any more than men are supposed to rule the world, and we are intended to balance out, and that's the good part of the women's movement.
What do you see as the biggest block to doing that? What do you see as the biggest kind of, what's the problem, with the male and female energy? What's the largest block we face today with getting them to get along?
We're actually making really wonderful progress. I don't think most American women, excuse me, would want to marry a Middle Eastern man, because the American man now helps with the children. They share work. They will, do more than just take the garbage out. They are a helpmate. They work as a team. And you go into some European countries and Middle Eastern countries, and it's not the case. So here in America, we really have made more headway in creating a balance than I think we realize. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that is a good point. I can see that. So Jesus, what did he leave behind for us? When you wrote that title, what were you... did he leave treasure behind? Is it moments of teaching? Those are sorts of treasure. Literal signs and paintings and artwork. What do you feel is the main trail of breadcrumbs that he left for us?
Every chapter has a different subject. And I'll just, I'll jump in on this one. The tomb, have you heard of the Jesus family tomb? Archaeologists have actually found it, and a tomb at that time, they had cave tombs at the time of Jesus in the side of a hill, and they were basically designed like a square in the middle. You'd go in the door, there'd be a square, almost like a little courtyard, and then there'd be niches off 3 of the walls. They had very peculiar burial customs at that time, and when somebody died, they would put them in the main room of one of these, seal it up for a year so that all the soft tissue would disappear. Then they would open up the tomb, collect the bones, and put them in stone boxes called ossuaries. And those ossuaries would then be buried in these niches in the side of the family tomb. The most important person was always buried in the niche to the right as you walked into the tomb. In the Jesus family tomb, there are 3 of these bone boxes or ossuaries, and they have inscriptions on them. One says Jesus, son of Joseph. One has the familiar name of Mary. Basically, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but it's like Miam, which is a familiar name for Mary. It's like, calling somebody Betty instead of Elizabeth. And after her name, it says Mar, M-A-R, which is a title, which means it's the feminine version of Lord. So here is somebody with a familiar name that's not typical in a Jewish burial, with a title which indicates she's like a lady, a lord or a lady, and she's in the same niche with this ossuary that says Jesus, son of Joseph. And then there's a third one that says Judah, son of Jesus. And in some of the other niches in different walls, there are other names that are associated with Jesus from the biblical time, including another one that had a nickname, and it was Jose or Josie, and that's what he called his brother Joseph. And it is against the customs to have nicknames on ossuaries, but in that ossuary there were 2 nicknames, and they were the names that Jesus used for those particular people. So when they analyzed, there were some bone fragments in those ossuaries, and they've done some preliminary DNA work on it, and there is no family connection or biological connection between the Mary and the Jesus in that niche. So it was not his mother, it was not his sister, it was most likely his wife, especially when you have Jude, son of Jesus, in there too.
So which country, where was this found, Mary?
This is outside, it would be outside the old Jerusalem walls in Jerusalem.
And when was this found? When did this happen?
Now, don't pin me in on dates. If I had to pick a date, it would be maybe 2012. It first started coming out. And it was headed up by James Tabor, who is the head of religious studies at the University of North Carolina. And he teamed up with a well-known filmmaker whose name I don't know how to pronounce. I've heard it. I still don't know how to pronounce it, but his first name is something that looks like Simcha. But it's fascinating.
Huh. So 2012, conveniently,
sure,
when the Mayan...
Don't pin me down on that exact date, but it's about that time.
Well, if it did happen, we'll be loose with. If it did happen, and then wouldn't that be something? With the ending of the Mayan calendar, everybody's energy focused on the winter solstice of that year, and the whole kind of we went through a whole apocalyptic type. What's going to happen? All kinds of theories came out, and then Jesus' tomb comes out. So I think collectively, energetically, that is a very symbolic mega ritual type happening or event, because for people's psyches to be exposed to that information, whether it was, not 2012, it was kind of after that movement. We moved through the end of that. Whether you believed in it or not, you were exposed to it. The news was talking about it. People were writing trillions of books about it. Everybody had a theory, and it was a massive thing.
And it at least gets people's minds opened up just a bit more, cracks the door open a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's all good. Because we're still learners. We only can take, you fed when you feed a baby, you give them a spoonful of food, and if they eat that, you give them another one. If they start to spit it out, you quit feeding them. Well, we humans can only be spoon-fed, so things have to open up by steps, or, we don't catch on.
What do you think, this is kind of jumping to a different topic, but relative to what we've been talking about the advances of biotechnology and nanotechnology? Do you believe that this is reverse engineered alien technology, or is it some kind of just random human event? Have you had any thoughts on some of those industries that are coming up with all these really fascinating ideas and how to clone human beings and genetically modify everything? Some people have suggested that this is all reverse engineered knowledge.
You're touching on a whole lot of things at the same time. As far as the genetics go, I think that we as a species have been engineered, at least to some degree. And when they've done the DNA testing, and Dr. Melba Ketchum would be the best example of this, she's done the DNA on Bigfoot, or had her labs do it. And the Bigfoot on the maternal side is human, and on the paternal side, it's some unknown genetic source that doesn't match up with anything. So perhaps we've all been manipulated to some degree. I think we have to be careful who's doing the manipulation. From what I know of humankind, it makes me a little nervous when they start doing it, because they're not doing us any favors by genetically modifying our foods. So, it makes me a little nervous when they want to go further than that. But yes, I understand the concept. And
wow, I'd love to talk to her. That would be a fascinating conversation. I think we talked about that, the humanity, the trust, the evolution, the maturity. When you give them these kinds of technologies and you hand them over ways to do really questionable things, and the ethics really and the integrity have to really be there, and it's not really there with anything else. And
there's been many
big
things,
government, or
where there's been a communication with the ETs where they have been reluctant to give us too much technology because we haven't made enough strides forward spiritually to deal with them correctly. And I have to agree with that. I mean, it scares me putting some of this stuff in the hands of human beings.
So the little people then, do you think they may have been genetically modified by ETs also, or do you think that was...
One of the people I interviewed for that book, and again the title is Cherokee Little People Were Real, was the great-great-granddaughter of Solly, who was one of the Cherokee heroes. And she said she felt the little people were from space or from out there. And actually they believe that they as a race are from the Pleiades. And many of their origin stories are hidden in stories that they talk about the seven sisters, referring to the seven stars and the Pleiades. So among the Cherokee, the ones that know, you know, who are knowledgeable, they feel like our origin is with the stars.
Yeah, and that same story is found in some other Apache prophecies, Hopi. They all have some kind of alignment or story or some kind of significant
that we come from
creational. And the Seven Sisters are one of the most important constellations to a majority of them. And if we listen to their oral stories, or we look at their pottery, or we look at some of their drawings, they put this information into things. They weave it into the stuff that they make and create. Even bead necklaces tell a story. Right. The Seven Sisters are often part of their the whole creational stuff. So it tells me to pay attention. I mean, I have more faith in those sources than I do in, like, you know, the day after Roswell, or people like Phil Corso, or, you know, people who come from a military background who suddenly pop up and say, well, I'm an expert on UFOs and ETs, and now I'm talking at all the lectures, and I'm doing this and doing that. Now suddenly I have 12 books out, and I'm an expert. Where did you come from?
He's either a 2 or a 3-legged table. Right. There's limits to what you can do without that 4th leg.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. So, you know, we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation. What do you see as a future for not only yourself and your work? Where do you see yourself progressing towards with the UFO phenomena? What's your fate in all of this, Mary?
Actually, I think many of the stories are brought to us. I don't feel like I actually really find them. I mentioned this to you, and I think in an email, we were contacted out of the blue by the travel station. And you're going to be the first to hear this, because I haven't talked about it publicly at all. But they're going to be doing a story about the underground base beneath the Smoky Mountain National Park, and they'll be filming it here in March for their next season. So just keeping on with the website, you know, somehow people are finding it, and they found that story through the website, and then they got my book after that. I think that this website connects us with a lot. Also, because of this website, 2 of us, Evelyn Gordon and I, spoke at the International UFO Congress a bunch of years ago now, and it was because of the website, and we got to speak to an audience of over 900 people. So the website is kind of my link to the outside world, and things come in that way, and also information goes out that way. And so I guess you might consider it a type of portal where ideas are...
It's a portal.
It's a portal.
Yeah, it's a rascal portal. It's a
rascal portal.
Channeling rascal portal, Mary. Wow, that's exciting, and I'm excited to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us about the project coming out in March. And we'll have to all keep an eye on. Can I ask your opinion
on one thing?
Sure.
We just found out that Animal Planet, with their hunting Bigfoot or finding Bigfoot, is coming to Asheville, and they're going to have a town meeting, and they're inviting anybody with Bigfoot experiences to come there. And if you have to RSVP, and I sent in to be accepted to be able to come. I haven't heard anything yet. Part of me would love to go there and tell them they need to be nice to Bigfoot instead of the way that they hunt them down. How would you do that? How would you make a point?
I would show up anyway, even if they didn't contact me.
Well, they don't. They don't tell you where it is until. You know.
Okay, well, if you get some kind of response, we go. I think your voice has to be heard in this topic. It's so necessary. I'm going to go hunt Bigfoot. How ignorant.
Right.
How ignorant. and shows. It's like a horse and pony show. It's like dangling something shiny just because they want ratings and money. I mean, I think that we're going to be able to see through some of these things so clearly. Somebody has to stop this ridiculous behavior from people who just take these topics, have no idea what they're really talking about, go in there as skeptics anyway, with a gun, ready to shoot anything, and oh, nope, that was a bear, sorry bear, and there's no compassion, there's no understanding, and someone has to teach them.
Can
so you have to go in there and you have to teach them. You have to teach them.
Can you imagine what you might say if you were there? How would you address a group like that?
How would I address it? I would just be myself and stand up. And if I were you and you had I had that story inside me, I would share it. I would say, I just want to share my experience. Here's my experience. It was traumatic and it was nasty interaction and they were mad and they came in and broke into the house, but they were trying to write something and trying to communicate, which shows intelligence and sentient being. And then you went out and you said something, and then there was an offering that was given. I mean, unless they're completely brain dead, and they don't have any heart left in them at all. I would hope and pray that something would click inside of these people, and they would realize. But we're talking show business, and we're talking mainstream media, and we're talking a totally different language, really, than when it comes to being a compassionate and person and working with these kinds of things. So I would tell them your story. I loved your story. Your story broke us into a whole bunch of different conversational topics, and maybe sharing your story will do the same thing for the meeting and get people to communicate about that, and maybe others will feel that as well. But sometimes we have to be the first one to speak up and say it, because everybody else is too afraid to speak up and say anything. Oh, I don't want to rock the boat. Forget the boat. Forget it. Jump out and swim. Right. Wow. Let me know how that goes. I'd love to talk to you after.
I'll see if they let me know where it's going to be.
Wow. Okay. So why don't we one more time tell people where they can find you? They have stories, they have pictures, they have questions. They can find you on your website.
All right. The website is skyshipsovercachers.com. And if you go there on the home page, there is a way in the upper left-hand corner where people can get in touch with us. They can send us stories or ask us questions, whatever it might be. Then there's something called Editor's Corner. If you open up on that, you can scroll way down to the bottom, and it briefly tells about the 3 books that have come out since 2013. And again, those 3 books are Cherokee Little People Were Real, Underground Military Bases Hidden in North Carolina Mountains, and Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left Behind for Us to Find. All the books are available through Amazon, and I think I covered it there.
Yes, you did. All right, guys. Well, Mary, this has been great talking to you about all of these things. You've given me some things to think about, and I know that everybody listening to the show, watching it, is going to walk away with some questions and maybe be inspired to go find some of their own answers, check their sources, come back and share with you if they find new information. And, working together is how we get it done. If we're all trying to do it in our own little corner, and we're all huddled off in our own little corner because we're so wrapped into other agendas. And
one more image to leave with you. You know what a big puzzle looks like. You have a piece of it. I have a piece of it. There's a whole lot of pieces you and I don't know, but they're there and they're being put together. And the picture is going to be completed if we each keep taking care of our own little area of expertise.
That's right. Thank you so much, Mary. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Enjoy.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining me here on Union Radio TV. I'm your host, Hillary Raimo, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.